Happy Monday and welcome back. It is the IDP Heat Seekers. We are your favorite Monday night IDP stop. Hopefully, we are your favorite Monday night IDP stop and you come by. We thank you guys as always for joining us. I am Roto Heat Brad, joined by Kraig and Austin. Preseason football is upon us. It is here. We are in the thick of it. We are just a few short weeks away from the season. And I do want to remind y'all that we're just a few short weeks away from being done for the season, actually. We've only got a couple episodes left. We got 2 left to be specific after tonight's IDP Strategies show, which will be a great one. Then after that, you can find our content at rotoheat.com, or you can hang out with us via Twitter. We got our Twitter handles here, and stick to Roto Heat here on YouTube because we will continue to upload content. We'll get you IDP waiver wires and all sorts of IDP goodness throughout the season. It's just not your regularly scheduled Monday night program. With that being said, tonight's episode is IDP Strategies, but I want to get right into it because we got plenty of news and notes. I will hand it over to Mr. Kraig. Kraig, what kind of news and notes we want to talk about from this week in IDP?
So this is sort of encompassing the past week. Like Brad said, some of this came out very shortly after our last show. So if you're wondering why we didn't talk about it then, it hadn't broken or it was breaking. We weren't looking for it while we were going live. But Shaq, former Darius Leonard, is expected to miss regular season games with the injury that he had regarding his back and the surgery. They don't think he's going to be out for the year. There's been some rumors that, he could not play during the regular season. They don't really know at this point is what it is. And as we've discussed on this show, back injuries are tricky and you don't want to mess with them really. You want to make sure it's fully healed before they go putting their star defensive player out there or one of their star defensive players. But Austin, I wanted to ask you, how is this affecting him in redraft settings for you?
I certainly probably have to fade him some, although I'm not sure how much exactly. I mean, this is still Shaquille Leonard that we're talking about. I have to get the name right because I'm like, this new name is throwing me off. I'm like, Who are we talking about? Shaq who? Shaq Leonard. So it's the weird name change thing that gets me. But I mean, it sucks because it's like, if he's healthy, I mean, you could there's plenty of linebackers that you could go and draft that aren't having the back issues and all of the different things, that are going to be on the field that are going to be on the field. So if you'd rather not waste that pick on a guy that just carries that uncertainty, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Brad?
Well, and you're seeing it, especially in the redraft setting, you're seeing it cause him to slip a little bit. When you would see him normally go 6th, 7th round, like in the IDP guys invitational in the draft I'm in, he went in the middle of the 9th round, I think back half of the 9th round. Wow. So people are definitely starting to believe that there's some significant time being missed. And I would put him in the same category as Chase Young. I mean, him and Chase Young are both guys that people are high on, but are injured and are expected to miss some games. And people are now, okay, I'm going to scoot him down the board a little bit. This would be the perfect time, at least in my mind, if you're in a dynasty format or in something that's a little bit more longer than season long, I would go try to trade for him if people are really strongly concerned about him. I'm not. I think, just given time, he will heal up and things will be fine. But this also makes me want some Bobby Okereke shares as well, because that means he's probably going to slot in as your top linebacker when it comes to fantasy production, at least in my mind. And he produced strongly last year, so given more time, I'm excited for him for sure. And he's a guy that I've targeted when people are sleeping on anybody else that isn't Shaq Leonard in that Indianapolis linebacking group.
Yeah, a couple other names to keep an eye on because they're going to have more than one linebacker out there for quite a bit of it. EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin are the 2 big names that I've seen that people have some interest in, depending on how that shakes out. They're both getting reps in camp as they try to figure out who they want on the field next to them. So keep an eye on that. And, the whole back injury thing, it's not just something for like Darius Leonard, Damon Clark, who we talked about, who the Cowboys drafted. Brad and I are in a league. It's positionless on defense, so you can start whatever you want. But we have a 6-round draft, rookies only, 12 teams, and he wasn't even drafted. So, I mean, people have those sort of fears, and I think they're warranted. Like I've said it before, the head and the back, you don't want to mess with those. And, I agree, it's got to affect them somewhat. So keep that in mind as we go through redraft season here. And the next one, so Roquan Smith formally requested a trade. There's a whole lot of scuttlebutt about whether or not he actually wants to move teams or if it's just about the money. Chicago Bears lately. It seems like it could be anything, whether it's the field that's the problem or their front office, wide receivers that they've tried to put around Justin Fields, a whole bunch of different things. But Brad, do you see any actual smoke to this, or do you expect him to be out in the field, given how little leverage these guys have in holding out if they want to get paid at all?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough thing for him is that contract. He's got to be on the field if he wants to make any money. I mean that's just the way it works. And you're hearing, NFL threatening people that are contacting his agent that are doing it unlawfully. I mean, once the NFL starts getting involved, all bets are off. I mean, you can't trust anything that happens because it just gets crazy. I would expect him to be on the field. And it wouldn't surprise me if a trade happened because Roquan isn't an Eberflus guy. It's not like he was there. It's not like he drafted him. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that, hey, we can get X players that I really like maybe, just putting this out there. Maybe he goes to the Colts and says, hey, we'll give you Eberflus. We'll give you Roquan for Darius or Shaq Leonard, or something like that. We're just like, hey, yeah, let's do a straight up. No, it's not going to happen. But I mean, if something like that happened where Eberflus contacted a team that he knows is trying to compete or a team that he's familiar with and says, hey, this is the deal. What do you want? What do you think? It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the NFL has done crazier things. And when you look at preseason, trades happen. I mean, they happen all the time. My team, Detroit, has made a trade 8 out of the last 9 preseasons. It hasn't been blockbuster like a Roquan Smith, but it's been some sort of trade. So trades are not unheard of in this time of the year. So wouldn't surprise me. What are you thinking, Austin?
I've been worried. I mean, we talked about it on the last show. I've been a little worried that he could miss time, but to your point, he's going to have to be on the field to get paid. I'm not so sure that, I don't know, Roquan, to me, in his statement, he really seems like he's really prepared to dig his heels in on this deal. And he's kind of taken the approach of like, hey, this is bigger than just me. This is, I'm taking a bad deal for the rest of the linebacker market if I, sign the deal that, the Bears are wanting me to sign or whatever. So, it's an interesting situation. I hope that he's on the field. I have him in as many leagues as I can get him in, of course. He's honestly just an incredible player, and it would be a huge loss for the Bears if he didn't play or if they, were forced to trade him, in some way. Keep in mind the NFL is not the NBA. Guys don't have as much leverage in this league as they do in some of the other leagues where they can demand trades and basically they make it happen. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. I do think if I'm the Bears, I'm probably doing whatever I can to come to a resolution with Roquan to make Roquan happy. I think, like I said last week, clearly he's one of the top 2 players besides their quarterback on the team. And I think the Bears need him on the field.
Well, and you look at his cap situation. I mean, he's on the 5th-year option. It's just under $10 million. I mean, it just kind of is what it is. So if the team wants to get out of it, I mean, they probably could, but I got to think they want him on the field. Kraig, what are you thinking?
I don't think he goes anywhere. I don't know why they would get rid of him or what they would want to get for him. You look at someone like Minkah Fitzpatrick. When he got traded, they got a first-round plus or something like that, small with him. I have to imagine the Bears would get that and probably more, given the player that Roquan's proven to be this far. So is the team going to pay that for him? Maybe in today's NFL, maybe certainly more than 10 years ago. I just still have a hard time seeing it happen.
I'm with you.
We got one last major one, and then we'll just throw out some couple of extra ones here at the end. So Jonas Griffith, who was a player we talked about last year, a good bit towards the end of the year, they were showing up well. He was competing for a starting spot, and all accounts, it sounded like he'd probably get one of the starting spots for that linebacker core for those inside linebackers for the Broncos. He is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, it sounds like, with a dislocated elbow, so hopefully comes back healthy. It was sort of him, Josie Jewell, and Alex Singleton in a 3-way competition for the 2 spots, and now they've thrown another guy into the ring, former Wisconsin standout, Cleveland Brown, Jacksonville Jaguar, Pittsburgh Steeler. Joe Shobert has signed there. So, Brad, how are you feeling about Joe there, and do you think he ends up with one of these starting spots?
I mean, I've always been a fan of the player, and I think he's better than what they've got. I mean, I would rather him starting over Josie Jewell. I just don't. It's hard for me to trust that he's going to step right in, pick up the defense, and go.
Yeah.
I know he's a veteran. He's been there for a minute. He's been in the league for a minute, so he should understand the scheme, I'm sure. But it's just going to take time. So I wouldn't be. I mean, if it's a flyer situation where you can get him for free, certainly stash him and see what happens. If Griffith isn't healthy and doesn't come back or quickly, or Josie Jewell just underperform, I mean, I got to think there's a way that he gets in there. Alex Singleton's kind of the odd card in this situation for me. I just don't know what to make of him in this situation with it. You know, they brought him over from Philly, and any one of these guys could step in and be the leader in tackles in the middle, and it wouldn't surprise me. Austin, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking along the same lines. I mean, I don't know. Joe Shobert looks like he's kind of lost a step. And I feel like Alex Singleton played well enough in Philly when he was given the opportunity. I mean, he really had to play well. So it'll be interesting to see which of those two steps up. I think Josie Jewell, as long as he can stay healthy, he should be, in the mix to probably be leading the way of the three. But it is definitely an interesting situation. And it's a good addition by the Broncos defense. I mean, even before the injury, I felt like the Broncos defense kind of needed some more depth at that linebacker position. It's kind of a weak spot on their defense when you look up and down it. So I think either way, it's a good addition for them. It definitely helps, having the injury, him having a path to a starting role or maybe some significant playing time of some sort. So it'll be interesting to see it work out for, we talked about, it looks like Jaws has Joe Shobert shares that he's hung on to, and good for you, Jaws. That could pay off big. So I would say continue to hold him. I certainly wouldn't move him. I'm going to watch it closely as the preseason goes on and see what happens and how much time those guys are spending on the field and what units they're running with. But I would hold and see if it can pay off for you for sure.
One thing to note with him, if he does end up, starting most of the season for him, he is going to have value, even if it is as a backup linebacker. I mean, his rookie year aside, every year since then, he's had over 100 combined tackles, which in tackle heavy league or balanced league, that's going to have value for you. So keep an eye on it. If you do have room, like I said, it's something we all think he's worth an add-on just to see how it shakes out. And we got 4, because one of these isn't overly or it is overly new. I just saw it pop up, but I'm going to read the 4 of them off, and then Austin, you'll get your pick of the litter to comment on here. So John Bostic signed with the Saints as a potential starter / depth piece at linebacker. Mckenzie Alexander, so it's a cornerback, but some people play cornerback leagues, to the Dolphins. Danny Shelton, one of those interior defensive linemen, to the Chiefs. And then Carl Nassib signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after being gone for a year or two. But he had played under defensive coordinator Todd Bowles, who, of course, is now the head coach there. So he signed as a depth edge piece. Austin, any of those give you any sort of interest at all?
Maybe John Bostic to the Saints. Pete Warner is a guy who just came up this week in our IDP chat, and he's an interesting player who, I think given the opportunity, he could be an outstanding player. But now you bring in a guy like John Bostic who, could potentially challenge him for some playing time. I'm not sure that he will, knock him out of it completely, but it'll be interesting to watch. And then, the other one is Danny Shelton to the Chiefs. The Chiefs have needed help along the front, defensive line. So it'll be interesting to see what Danny Shelton's able to do. They, I believe they just brought in Carlos Dunlop as well. So the Chiefs are bringing in pieces. They are trying to do whatever they can to get their defensive line right. They've needed help outside of Chris Jones. They don't have a whole lot. So I'm excited as a Chiefs fan to see them bringing people in and trying to improve their defensive line.
Fred?
This is a whole bucket of meh. I mean, there's really nothing here that's fantasy relevant. I mean, all veterans, all depth, don't get me wrong. Respect to the players. All these guys have been around the league for a little while and deserve roster spots because they play hard. But none of these guys are really going to do much to your fantasy situation unless some significant injuries happen. Dennis Shelton's always been a space eater, not a fantasy producer. John Bostic is the only one that's actually given you some fantasy production, and it's been kind of spurts here and there. Veteran guy, I just don't see him taking the role. They seem really high on Pete Werner. They seem, Demario Davis obviously has been a strong player in the league for a while. I mean, I just don't see the value in any of those. Then you look at some of the other ones, and nothing I'm jumping all over, but it's good to see some of these guys signing because they have been sitting out there. Nassib is truly depth. There's no way he's taking one of those starting spots. I mean, so it's rotation at best, which means I'm not touching it because there's just nothing that you can trust there.
Yeah, Bostic's the one that if you're taking a flyer on any of these guys, he has the, I guess, clearest chance of any of them to end up with a spot. He has been productive. Not last year when he got injured. I think he only played 4 games, but the prior 2 years he had over 100 combined tackles each year for Washington. And we know that those linebackers in that same scheme can be productive. And if that offense ramps it up like we think we're probably going to compared to last year, got a nice defense around him, you can still see value out of both starting linebackers with the Saints. But I agree with the rest, not a whole lot of value unless there's injuries.
Yeah. All right. So that's the news and notes for today. So hopefully, if any other news and notes pop up throughout the week until next week's show, you guys are connected to us on Discord and you're in the chat, so you can ask questions there. Go to roadheat.com. You can get to us. You can join our free Discord server. You can jump in, chat with the team, chat with the other folks in the community. The thing's growing on the daily. We love chopping it up with y'all. So jump over there via rotoheat.com and talk to us then. All right. So the main body of this conversation is around IDP strategies. And this has been kind of one of our more popular episodes we've done over the years on the YouTube channel. So we like to talk about it every year and just kind of work through some different thoughts. Redraft, Dynasty, in-season team management. These are some of the topics and some of the conversations we're going to have around IDP strategies. And hopefully it helps you. Now, we're obviously in the thick of redraft. I know I'm in a couple of IDP specific type redrafts for charities going on right now and things like that. But I've also got some dynasties that are going on. I'm in the middle of a dynasty startup draft as well for some guys in the card collecting community. So it's, so there is a little bit of all that right now, but the dynasty side of it obviously will be more helpful to you as we get to the off season when dynasties really kick up, because the startups normally really pick up kind of February, March. That's when guys really start going. So if you have questions, obviously post them on this video or post them in any of our areas that you get a hold of us and we can help you. But that's where we're going tonight. So let's start with redraft focus. When we're in a redraft, and I'll start with Kraig, seeing as he was running the news and notes, we want to get his take first on this. In a redraft format with, Roto Heat's IDP scoring, you can find over at rotoheat.com, search IDP scoring, and you'll get our scoring. With that type of scoring, when do you start typically looking to pick up IDPs? And then follow up, what do you value most? Defensive end, edge, DT, LB, safety, cornerback. How do you value what position group?
So typically I'm going to fill up my offensive starters with the way our scoring is. It is sort of more of it's a mix between, beginner type scoring and balanced, where you're, balanced. That's what I was looking for. It's not defensive heavy. It's somewhere in that, middle zone-ish. But most of the scoring, you're going to see your offensive players score more than your defensive. It's not a huge gap, once you get beyond sort of those outliers that you have each year, like a Cooper Kupp or a Jonathan Taylor. But it is present, and that's why I'm generally going to fill up my offensive starters. I will say that it does also matter when you look at your league. If you have that offense outweighing the defense scoring-wise, but if you have double the defensive starters than offense for some reason, take that into account, where you're probably going to want more of the top-end defensive talent if you can get it, because that offensive talent that usually tapers out, it's going to last you longer. So I'm pretty sure I've said it every show, but know your league, roster spots, scoring, all that fun stuff. As far as what I'm looking at taking, if I'm taking an IDP early, I'm going to be starting off with the defensive end, edge type position, potentially defensive tackle if it's a DT required league. My strategy from years past, and when I started up playing IDP in, I think it was 2012, used to be linebackers, but linebacker position has just changed over the years, where you're not seeing as many of these guys with how long the season is. And then with the way defenses are changing, having those, 3-ish linebackers that are going up to blow up the run and stuff, playing more defensive backs means less time on the field for a larger group of the linebackers. So that's sort of taken away the importance, and that's led to more guys in that linebacker group, sort of in that just middle glob that you used to ignore, have relevance if you're in a league where you're starting with 3 or more linebackers, because you're going from, usually maybe one a team in that, 90% snap range to, maybe you got 2 in that 60 to 80 range now, and then you got another group in 30 to 50 or something like that. So with that shift, I've shied away from linebackers because I feel I can find guys we just talked about, like Joe Shobert or someone, pick him up, hang on to him if you got the roster space, see if it pans out. Whereas you could get a guy with 100+ tackles off of waiver wires that you couldn't in prior years.
All right, Mr. Austin, what is your strategy?
So we talked a little bit about this last week, where we would go when we would draft IDPs. And as Kraig always says, know your league, know your scoring, know how deep your rosters are. Those kinds of things are all going to impact who I'm drafting and where I'm drafting them. My strategy typically is not to be the first person to draft an IDP player, although it does kind of depend on, what my draft position is and where, if I'm on the turn and it's going to be a while until it gets back to me. So yeah, I think last week we said 5th to 7th round for the high end, top guys in the league. So if you want to go and try to grab the TJ Watts, the Roquan Smiths, the, Micah Parsons of the fantasy football world, then you probably want to draft those guys a little bit earlier than you will the rest of the pack. But, to Craig's point, there's quite a big drop off from TJ Watt from the field, obviously. But it's not like you can't pick up value later in your drafts if you do decide to punt and capitalize on, the guys who are taking those IDP players earlier than you'd like and leaving some meat on the bone, if you will, for your offensive, positions. So for me, it's that 5 to 7 range when I'm looking at, positions that I'm going to draft. I still do typically target the linebackers more than the edge rushers, and that's just me personally. Although I'm looking for 3-down linebackers, I'm looking for linebackers who, are getting those 100+ tackles per season. And then especially guys who are able to get to the quarterbacks and impact the game in more ways than just being, tackle heavy. Guys who are able to go out and generate sacks, tackles for losses, and even play into coverage and things like that. So they're just not leaving the field as much. So that's what I typically go for. And then, after that, if I can grab one of the top safeties, I really like the safety position. It is deep, so it's one of those deals where, again, if you don't grab the top guys, you could probably punt and grab a guy who's a little later and would do just fine for you. Defensive end is a position that is pretty thin. So, if you're looking at grabbing defensive ends, there's some talent there. Guys like Emmanuel Ogbah, who you could probably punt and get later on. But the top talent at defensive end, it falls off pretty quickly. So, it just kind of depends on how you want to build your roster as far as how you value that position. But I definitely would say out of the 3 positions that I mentioned, the drop off for the defensive end position is quite a bit more than like the linebacker safety position.
Yeah, and I will, just because I've got a draft in each format going, I do want to kind of reference some of what I'm seeing right now. In a redraft draft that I have going on now, or a season long or yearly, whatever you call it, the first IDP went at 6-1. That was Micah Parsons, and then all of a sudden, there was just a whirlwind of IDPs going. We saw TJ Watt go next. I didn't draft the first IDP for my roster until 7-8, and I grabbed Brian Burns because defensive end, it's really hard to get the ones that I love unless I'm drafting them as one of my first IDPs. Now, obviously, I always mention, 6th, 7th round is kind of where the sweet spot to start drafting some of those high-end guys. We saw a lot of guys go quick, though. Between 6-1 and 7-8, when I finally grabbed one, Parsons went, TJ Watt, Jordan Brooks, Bobby Wagner, Aaron Donald, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Devin White, Fred Warner. Somebody took Foyesade Olukun. Not my choice. Roquan went right after Brian Burns, and I didn't touch Roquan just because of the trade things. I was like, you know what? I'll grab my defensive end. Maybe he slips a little bit. He didn't. That was my fault. And then in a dynasty format, I waited until I was the 3rd person to draft an IDP. We had 5-1. Micah Parsons went to a friend of Craig's. Then at 5-11, TJ Watt went. And then at 6-11, I drafted Myles Garrett. So IDPs really hadn't been going. Then after that, I took Derwin James at 8-11, Jordan Brooks at 9-2, and then Josh Allen 13-2, and I just took Budda Baker in the 17th round. So this league, people are just not touching IDPs as much. So I said, I'm going to wait. Now all of a sudden, they're going hot and heavy. I typically try to target defensive end first personally when I draft an IDPs, just because, like you guys mentioned, they are harder to come by, but that doesn't mean you can't get good ones, because a lot of these rookies and second-year guys, I think, are going to start to show up. We even saw a little bit of it in the preseason. Shout out to my Detroit Lions. Aiden Hutchinson looked fantastic and was showing up some the strong motor and what made him the second overall pick. But some of these second and rookies are really intriguing to me that I think could start producing and help balance out, because it is pretty top heavy in the defensive ends. So I would say defensive end, then safety, then linebacker, and if you need DT and cornerback, I would say wait. I will not draft a corner typically in any format. I just, like Kraig and I have talked about plenty of times, you watch the show, I rotate them off the waiver wire. It's so hard to trust the corner, and I've yet to find a scoring format that really gives cornerback the love that it deserves, obviously, but I'm not doing it. So that's my personal opinion on all that. Kraig, before we move on, any other final thoughts after all these things? Did they stir any things up in your noggin?
Well, you do know a league where there's good scoring for cornerbacks. I mean, the positionless league we're in, Kenny Young was a top 20 IDP player last year. So
very true. Okay, there is.
I do that literally every show. We bring him up. Kenny Moore, whenever you hear this, sorry, but yeah, I mean, Kenny Moore is a top 20 guy last year, and there's a bunch of other cornerbacks that filtered up there. So if you find a good one
positionless
in that league, but that is beyond abnormal. So,
I mean, there are no starting positions. You just start whatever you want. I mean, you just don't find that very often or ever. That's the first one I've ever had.
But yeah, a cornerback that scores 200 points last year, and he was 17 out of all IDP players last year in that league. So it can be done if you really want to try.
Yeah, it's definitely a different league format for sure. But by and large, pretty typically for what most people are going to experience. Okay, so that's for your drafting every year leagues. Now we're going to jump over the Dynasty format, and then we'll finish off with talking about kind of in-season, how to manage your team, trades, deadlines, waiver wires, all that. So when doing a Dynasty, I guess the question then to Kraig to start is, do you build your team the same way? Do you focus on building young and then getting younger guys to build your IDPs, or do you look to kind of win now, just grab the most elite? Where do you draft them? Do you value positions any different? And go.
So scoring, and this applies for redraft too, but really is going to determine how you value different players, and also how many you start per position. So one of the things that I've found useful, and it's hard to keep up to date, especially if you're just starting off the top, but you can build nice spreadsheets where you can import players from years past. It doesn't have to be every player, but it will give you an idea over the past X number of years. All right, these were the scores, whether it's total points per game, however you want to do it, of the top players. Tier 1 defensive tackles, tier 2 scored this much, tier 3 scored this much, and you can get a feel for, all right, where are the tier breaks compared to each position across your defense and across your offense. And it'll give you a nice visual to figure out, okay, so when I'm going into my draft here, typically if I think this guy has linebacker 1 upside, this is where he's going to put himself in the future across all of the defensive players, all of the offensive players. And that'll give you an idea of where you should be drafting them. Because if you're wide receivers, running backs, and quarterbacks, let's say it's a super flex league, so quarterbacks matter more. If all of those scored double the points of the top linebacker in the league, there really isn't a whole lot of value of taking a linebacker up that high. Now, if you're starting 4 linebackers versus 1 wide receiver, like I said, maybe you do that weighting a little bit differently. But having a nice visual just to compare your tiers and what you can expect out of a player and where you're projecting them for the next year to compare has been really useful for me. So building something like that, if you have the time to do it, will help you get a feel for it. But in terms of how I start my leagues, I do generally try to start off younger. Of course, if you're in a league full of people that do the same thing, at some point, you're just reaching so far that you're losing value. If you're fine with that, it's not the one I'm in with you, Brad, but in Rick 3 years ago, started up these Roto Heat Superflex bonus leagues with some crazy scoring, but it was an auction startup, and I just went super young, getting draft picks and stuff like that. Basically, throwing the first year in the league, just with how I constructed my team. And I got, the first overall pick, and I had some other trades for picks as it went. And I ended up now with a roster that has a quarterback for Superflex, Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. I have Jonathan Taylor, Jamar Chase, Rashad Bateman, a whole bunch of these guys just based on going super young and sort of punting that first year. Now, does it always turn out that way? No, of course not. But it all goes back to what are you willing to do when you're starting up a league, whether it's Dynasty, redraft, you can't really do that, of course. But for Dynasty, I try to go young and do something different. There's a league that I'm in. There's an auction startup, and they had all of the draft picks for, I think it was 2022, 2023, and 2024, all the first rounders for that. And I have, in a 12-team league, 11 2024 first-round picks. Because I decided I'm going to just try. This is a crazy league. I've never seen, something like this in startup. It's completely different. I really wanted to get the whole 2024 first-round draft class, just to be able to hold on to those and see how it pans out as trading pieces. And I have some other, nice stuff. I have like Tua and Joe Burrow are my quarterbacks there. I didn't completely just punt off everything else, but it's a bunch of young guys and then those to see, hey, what can I do with a team like this? So when you're in a bunch of different leagues, you probably get a little bit bored at some point and want to try different things. If you want to try drafting but not paying attention to the team, there's a lot of places like Underdog, who we do have a partnership with. You can find out that at it's a code RotoHeat. I would assume so. I don't know offhand. But there's deposit codes for that. But you can go draft like a best ball team and have fun, do it, and then not worry about it till the end of the year. How you're doing if you want to scratch that itch. But with the number of leagues that I'm in, and it's not, I'm not in 20 leagues or something like this, but I want to try something different when I'm starting a new Dynasty league.
And to answer your question, Scampers, shout out to Scampers, the greatest kitty in the world. Yes, there are. I'm in one that it's called Pinnacle of Devi. It's something a bit deeper. So we draft, we're drafting high schoolers, college kids, things like that, but it is a best ball. So it's in my fantasy league and it'll run and it'll do all the lineup submissions for you. So there are some out there. It's not as huge as the offensive side is, but there are still plenty of IDP best ball options.
I would make all my leagues best ball if I could. If I was in charge of all my leagues for a day, that would be my move because I hate screwing around, especially with different websites and formats and remembering scoring and waivers and all the league different rules. Best ball is where it at for me.
Yeah, best ball can be fun. There's some value to it for sure. I'm there with you. Austin, where are you at with how you build your dynasty roster from the ground up?
I definitely love how Kraig let in with just building the charts. Yeah, it's very time consuming, but I think actually I've started to do that with most of my dynasty startups, depending on the leagues. Like I've been in a salary cap league where I'm comparing salary to fantasy performance, and I'm putting in formulas that may or may not work to try to help me determine like, okay, what's my, how do I manage my spend and get the most out of it, that kind of thing. This is a pretty interesting deal to do. So like whatever your league format is, I definitely encourage you to take the time, have some planning and some forethought that goes into the to the draft, before you start your startup or whatever. But yeah, I definitely like to go young for sure. I wouldn't say that like I base my entire draft off of age. If I see, you have to keep in mind, like one thing that's interesting to me, and Kraig, I don't know if you would agree with this, is the defensive tackle position seems like it's a position that is sort of ageless. And so guys like Cameron Hayward, guys like, Fletcher Cox is getting older now and his replacement has probably arrived. But, guys who have been around on the defensive in that defensive tackle position for a long time. What was it? The other guy from New Orleans, Cameron
Jordan
Cameron. Yeah. Or Cameron Jordan. Is that his name? Whatever his name is. He's got two first names.
Cameron was the tight end for the Browns.
That's right. Yeah. So, guys like that who just seem like they're ageless and who are still, when we did our rankings for this season, like they were both in the top 10. So it just depends on the position as far as, if I'm looking to absolutely go young or not. I think the linebacker position is a pretty good position to go young on, just because this game's so violent. That position specifically is one that, they take a beating. And then, defensive ends, I like to go young with those guys as well. You can find a lot of really good young talent, guys that I targeted in my dynasty startups, just in the last couple of years was, Azeez Ojulari, the Odafe Owe. I think he goes by Jason Owe. I mean, those guys who are, I think, just absolute studs that are going to just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely try to go young with those. As far as like when I start drafting them again, I'm just watching how the draft is going. I'm kind of getting, feeling it out. I go into it with a plan, try to stick to that plan as much as I can, but you also just kind of have to go with the flow of the draft too, right? So, don't start reaching and panicking, just try to stay true to what you know. If you don't know, just try to do your best. And that's how I just try to do it. I try to stay more young than anything on the dynasty side.
Never fear, trading is here. I mean, like, for me, I don't go into a dynasty draft and go, man, I got to nail my roster immediately. Otherwise, there's nothing. I mean, as soon as I get done with my draft, I'm already firing trades up to guys, because I'll look at my roster and go, okay, this is where I think I need some help, or this is where maybe I want to try to do some things. Or if I've gone into a draft and I've, if you watch how the draft's falling and you say, you know what, I'm going to target and take all these things. Like currently the draft we're in, for one of the IDPs, the Dynasty IDP I'm in, it's just a 1 QB, but it's got full starting roster. So you're starting a DT, you're starting a cornerback, all this, that, and the other. And one guy's decided to load up on quarterbacks, hoping that maybe he can do some finagling after the fact and really hornswoggle some other owners. Okay, that's fine. Do that. I am not going to do that. Sometimes I do, but in my mind, it's like I go into a draft and I go, I'm going to take whatever I think is best for this roster. I want to win now, but I also want to build a roster that doesn't suck in 3 years. So it's kind of a balancing act. I also watch the way the draft falls out. If guys really start to target a position group, I pivot and go a different direction and maybe look for some other value. So in the dynasty draft, I obviously grabbed a couple IDPs early, but then I saw guys like DeAndre Hopkins sliding. DeAndre Hopkins landed in the 11th round. I took him. I was like, he may be out a few weeks, but he's my wide receiver 4. Yeah, he's my wide receiver 4. So I'm not going to be the least bit upset if he's out 6 weeks and I don't have to start him. And then when he comes back, he's a wide receiver 2 or 1. So it's you got to kind of go with the flow of the draft and not be afraid to go trading after the fact. We've heard it over and over again. Plenty of people on the internets, plenty of our friends have said trading makes fantasy fun, and I absolutely agree with it, because that's part of my favorite part of fantasy football, is just trying to work some deals and do some things. Now, I'm not as crazy. Some of my league mates will send trade offers where there's 4, 5, 6 guys going back and forth each way, and I'm like, I don't do that much typically, but I like to trade. I like to make moves, I like to build my roster, fix my taxi squad, add pieces, add picks, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of what I do. Now, I typically target very similarly how I would do redraft. Defensive ends probably are the first thing I target, although this was what I targeted. I targeted defensive end, then I grabbed a safety, then I grabbed a linebacker, then I grabbed another edge. So defensive end tends to get hot and heavy for me, and then I start looking at kind of where's the sweet spot, where's the value at? Am I getting a better value if I look at a linebacker over a safety? Fine. So that's kind of where that goes. Kraig, any final thoughts before we move on to in-season management? Anything else that's popped up while we were chit-chatting?
Well, it sort of bleeds over into this next thing in my home league, which I care more about winning and having fun than money or anything like that because of what's involved. But it's the league that started in 2012. And in that league, I've had 179 trades since the league started. That's
awesome.
20 trades a year. It's 40 more than the next person. So, yeah, trading makes fantasy fun, as a wise man once said. And you said.
I love
Scott
trading.
Fish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but yeah,
trading.
No, that was it.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Don't be afraid to trade. And, in the comments in your trade window are really helpful, or send a message, send a DM. communication is key, whether it's in your relationships as an individual or as a fantasy owner. Having the relationships, having the conversations, it's all very important to building the ability, the bridge to be able to send players back and forth. You got to talk to the other owners. You got to get to know them a little bit, even if nothing else, just to understand how they like to trade or players or positions they value more than others. Definitely get to know the other league mates as best you can. I know sometimes it's harder to do that if you guys aren't close, but you got to do it. It's important to be able to do that, and also to know how they potentially would draft too. I mean, you're getting to build a profile, just like you build profiles for the players you want to draft. Build profiles of the managers you're going against, so you know how to beat them. All right. So with that being said, the last part of this spectacular IDP Strategies episode is talking about how to manage your team in season. Waiver wires, we can talk a little trades if you have thoughts that pop up there as well. But first, I want to get to a quick question. One of the greatest, Jaws, popped in, and welcome, Jaws. Usual wait and see approach when a player switches teams? ? Or start Khalil Mack week 1 versus the Raiders. Also has Judon, Jalen Phillips, and Kayvon Thibodeau on the bench currently. What are you doing with this? I think you kind of – obviously week 1 is still a few weeks out. I don't know that I'm doing Khalil Mack against the Raiders. That just feels like a trap start in my mind. Austin, Kraig, any thoughts on that? I think I want to lean. I got to look at who's.
So Miami plays the Dolphins. So Judon and Phillips.
Miami's always going to play the Dolphins because they are the Dolphins.
Patriots.
I do think
they
the
never
Raiders
play the Dolphins.
Ooh, bringing the big brain energy. Go ahead, Austin. Sorry.
I think the Raiders have a pretty decent line, don't they?
It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean,
kind of middle of the pack, a little below average.
I like Khalil Mack season long. I mean, I don't know matchup wise. I mean, it's hard. Like, you're asking me to predict week 1 matchup without seeing a finished product on the field at all this season, so that's kind of difficult. But I will say, I like Khalil Mack. This season, I still believe in the talent. I'm still buying the talent. It's still that sort of that Von Miller vibe where he, went and played for Los Angeles and then all of a sudden he's back. I think that could happen for Khalil Mack as well. The Raiders have a pretty good defense. I like the pieces around him. I think that he's going to thrive in that system and that defense. So I really like him a lot this season. You talked about wait and see approaches. I would say Jalen Phillips, Kayvon Thibodeau, and maybe even Matthew Judon are as much of wait and see approaches as any of those you listed. So of all of those, I'm probably playing Khalil Mack. Judon maybe is the other guy that I would consider.
I definitely am strongly considering Judon against Miami. New head coach, new scheme. It's still the same Tua. That feels like a good situation. I don't hate starting Khalil Mack because you know what you're getting. And you'll probably get the best Khalil Mack the first few weeks before he starts getting hurt and missing time, right?
Yeah.
Kraig, any thoughts on that?
So the one that came to mind, and I'm trying to pull it up here to see last year what he did. Excuse me, which wasn't a whole lot because it was first game of the season as well, and then the last game. So either one of them meant a whole lot. But there's been a lot of reports out of camp that Patriots offense is a complete mess as far as having problems blocking people, both run blocking and pass blocking. Jones not looking good. They don't know for sure who's calling plays and who's doing what.
Matt Patricia is involved, so Matt Patricia ruins things. So it is what it is.
Sounds like you have an opinion on Matt Patricia there, Brad.
I mean, I've got some.
Why that would be.
I've got some direct knowledge of that hornswoggler.
Every time you say that, I think of Hornswoggle back in I don't know what the mid 2000s WWE, the little leprechaun that they had that may not have been in the storyline. Vince McMahon's a legitimate son, and there's all sorts of stuff. But that's literally what I think of. But that's nothing to do with this. I'd keep an eye on Phillips. But then the most consistent last year out of all of those would be Judon, who I liked. And again, like you said, Mack was hurt. He's going to be playing against the Raiders. He'll have that extra sort of edge, and he'll have another great pass rusher across from him. But at the same time, the Raiders' offensive line, like Austin said, was a bit better than I thought they were. And Derek Carr has more pass rushing. Derek Carr has more pass rushing options. He has more options to pass to that are going to be guys that he can trust to get the ball to this year. So Phillips and Judon would be my initial thoughts.
Yeah. And keep an eye as camp continues, Jaws. Obviously you're not setting your lineup right now, so keep an eye on it, see how things go. You know, if you're continuing to hear these same comments out of Patriots camp, that plays into this equation. You know, if you're continuing to hear, or if Raiders have some injuries, you know, Raiders offensive linemen have been injured up and down in the last few years. I think Leatherwood, maybe. I have to look into it. I feel like significant starters missed time for the Raiders. So keep an eye on all that. And if you're hearing those types of conversations as you get to week one, then maybe it makes you change your opinion. Right now, you leave Khalil Mack penciled, you consider Judon or Phillips, and you kind of go from there. And shout out Scampers with the dossier. If you want a class on writing dossiers, obviously we have to get Scampers involved because 33-page dossier is glorious. It is absolutely glorious. All right, so we want to wrap the conversation up with how to manage your team in season, what to do, what not to do, maybe how to handle trade deadlines, waiver wires, things like that. It's kind of one of those. It's kind of an open-ended question, so we'll just kind of shoot some things around. I wanted to bring up the idea of how much of your money do you really prioritize to defensive free agents on the waiver wire versus offensive free agents. Do you have a specific set kind of amount that you do, or is it based on, what is your goal when it comes to spending your free agent money? Kraig, I'll let you start it off. Is there different ways that you manage your team throughout the season?
Well, it really depends on what you're looking to do with your team and your expectations for them. If you have a young team, and you have guys, extra roster space because guys on the taxi squad or guys get hurt, just getting more of that youth, get those more opportunities to hit the lottery ticket as the season goes on, and whether you believe in them and keep them or you don't so much and you trade them off because they're doing well that year. That's how I look at it for a younger team. An older team, you can go about it either way. If you're really contending and you don't have deep benches, you're probably going to need to be looking for guys that are going to contribute to you for this year. But if it's a deeper bench sort of situation in Dynasty and you have an older team, you can still try to pick up some of those younger guys and hold on to them and hoping they pan out. For redraft, it's sort of the complete opposite of that, where if a guy isn't helping you this year, why bother? Now you can sort of project, like you have a list, and something I'd recommend doing, sort of have a list or, a go-to for depth charts so you know where to look at, like, okay, so-and-so gets hurt. What's the playing time been so far this year? What does it sort of seem like who's going to be next up on the depth chart? And keep an eye out for that so you know who to put those waiver dollars on if you have it. Other leagues that don't have, the blind bidding money, which I think most do, but some just do, the reverse the standings. There's still plenty of leagues like that. If there's someone you really want and your league allows it, see if you can trade for a higher waiver spot. I've seen trades like that before. Again, where it's just knowing what you're able to do in your league. But in redraft, if a guy's not useful or if you don't think he's going to be potentially useful in a little while, there's no reason to be hanging on to him.
Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with that. There's certain positions that are reserved for the waiver wire. We talked a little bit about it earlier, the cornerback position. If you do play with cornerbacks and not just the defensive back designation. Oh, that's interesting. I definitely encourage you guys to keep an eye on the waiver wire, try to prioritize that position for the waiver wire and not waste your draft picks on those cornerbacks. I could sort of say, defensive line, you can sort of do the same thing with more so than, the linebacker, safety, or defensive end position. So those two positions specifically, you can sort of keep an eye on your waiver wire and get some pretty good talent there if you watch it close enough. The other part of it is just like he's, like Kraig said, paying attention to sites like RLads and watching the snap counts, watching, the rotations, things like that. So when there is an injury, you can be first to market on the right person. That's kind of the other thing is it's like, we talked a little bit earlier about teams that if, said person got hurt or if said person didn't play, for instance, Roquan Smith, who's the guy that's stepping in for Roquan that you want to own or have on your roster on that defense? I don't know right now, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm watching the preseason. I'm trying to figure out who's getting the snaps, who's looking like they're doing their part, performing well, and I'm keeping an eye on those things so that when it's time to pull the trigger and roster one of those guys purely for opportunity, right? So, a guy like Neville Gallimore, who, the Jets a couple of years back were just injury riddled, and Neville Gallimore really is not like an outstanding player that everybody wanted to own, but he was very productive for some of my fantasy teams, and I was able to get him off the waiver wire just because I knew that opportunity was going to be there, and sometimes that trumps talent. So just keeping an eye on those things, paying attention to those things, and being sort of the first to market to get the right guys. I think that's all really important.
Definitely don't waste any money on corners. Just like don't waste any draft picks on corners. You can rotate those in and out for free. And if you're looking for places to see snap counts, things like that, if you're not familiar, you can always Google NFL snap counts. I think it's lineups.com is where I typically look for snap counts, things like that. If you have access to the the PFFs of the world, you can see grades, things like that. If you go to Pro Football Reference, you can see some information. I mean, so there's a lot of places for free, potentially outside of PFF, obviously, where you can get a lot of that information. Typically, a lot of the websites you're going to use for fantasy, you can search, look at cornerback information as well. So definitely don't waste a lot on them, because week to week, I mean, most leagues I'm in, and I don't want to say all because I'm sure it doesn't happen in all of them, but most leagues I'm in, every week I've got a new starting cornerback. I mean, it's just a pretty common occurrence for me. And even if you have to start DT, sometimes I'm pretty regularly rotating those guys out in and out unless I have an elite option. Like in this draft that I was talking about, the Dynasty, I just grabbed DeForest Buckner. If you have one of the top couple of DTs, absolutely no need to do anything other than plug them in every week and just hope for the best, because some weeks they'll be great, some weeks they'll be okay. You'll probably have some duds too here and there because it's a position that's pretty volatile for the most part. And then other than that, when it comes to in-season management, don't be afraid to take a shot. There have been times where I've spent a bunch of free agent money on a guy that fills in for somebody who's on a long-term injury designation. Maybe they tore an ACL, does something where they're out for the season or a significant amount of time. Sometimes I'll do that if it's in a position of need. Sometimes I'll do that just to stop someone else from getting it for a position of need and then try to work a trade. I mean, you have to know what your league does and how they function in terms of team needs, things like that. And don't be afraid to take a big swing. Sometimes you miss. I mean, it's going to happen even if you don't. What's the Gretzky quote? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So whatever that quote is, Mike Gretzky. So in season, I don't allocate a lot of money one way or the other. I just kind of look at where my team's at. If I get hit with the injury bug, I typically go trading before I go to the waiver wire. Waiver wire tends to be, be a guy last year, the year before, Quincy Williams. I jumped on waiver wires and grabbed him up because he shot up and did some big things after, Gerard Davis did what Gerard Davis does, so it's like those types of things can happen and they can really be strong plays for you when you do that. So don't be afraid to do it. But I lean on trading first. Waiver wires kind of maybe you get lucky. I don't lean on my waiver wire as truly something much more than a what the heck play kind of thing. Kraig, as we wrap it up, any final thoughts? Anything else that came to mind as we were talking?
We do have the expectation that's going to be similar to last year for IDP waiver wires at rotoheat.com and also on the YouTube, which you're probably watching this on now. So thank you if you are. But each week there would be a defensive tackle and a cornerback for those of you in those leagues. That's someone that is not widely owned. We do go with pretty low owned percentages when we can for what we think are good plays. And then you can always, look back and see how the season went, trying to figure out some sort of system for my hits and misses for the people I'm picking for those. To see how well I did over the course of a year. So we'll see how that goes. But again, defensive tackle and cornerback specific plays. A lot of places don't have those. You can find them on other sites too. But for those of you that need those, you'll be able to find them with us and DMs, Discord, and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, once we get to the in season, which is coming up quickly, we're gonna, it's gonna look different. Obviously, our Monday show is gonna disappear for a little while, and we're gonna focus on giving you some in season content. Obviously, you won't lose Austin. Austin will still be here in the wings, helping us and doing some things. So we'll find ways to get him out in front of you as well, so you can still see his wonderful face each week. But it's gonna look different. You'd rather watch Monday Night Football than us. I won't even be worried about that because I would rather watch Monday Night Football, right? We want to watch the football. It's back. But that doesn't mean that we don't have content for you. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We've been working on, YouTube shorts. We've been doing, some shorter form stuff for you so you can get a quick hit from the Roto Heat team and then move on. We're also going to be doing our waiver wires on the offensive defensive side, like Kraig mentioned, from the defensive side. We've done that every year for the last couple of years, and it's gone well. So make sure you subscribe, you click the notification icon, do all those things. And like I've said throughout the video, rotoheat.com is going to be the main source for you. It gets you to our Discord channel so that you can connect with us and have the conversation at any time. We got guys chatting 24/7 in there. You can reach the team in there. We are easily available, whether it's there or Twitter DMs. We are more than welcome to chat with you guys. We love to help. That's what we're here to do, and we do appreciate it. I know the off season's coming to an end, and I just want to take a second and tell everybody thank you. You guys continue to make Roto Heat very popular. Our views, everything's up, whether it's page views on the website, views on YouTube. We're adding people on the daily. We're working at adding new content. We're getting new people in that are helping build quality tools on the website that you don't necessarily see in front of you, like the three of us. We've got guys working on content. Shout out to Dez, who's dropping Devi profiles if you're looking for college content. We've got guys that are doing all sorts of different stuff. So we do thank you guys. Because of you, we're able to do these things. So keep liking, keep clicking those notifications, subscribe options, send it out to everybody. Hit your grandma up, tell her to get into fantasy football and watch us too there. We are not for just you, we're for everybody. We want to help all fantasy football players. We do thank you guys as always for hanging out with us. We got 2 weeks left. So we're going to talk about 2022 rookies again, so we can talk some more about Aiden Hutchinson, because I know I love talking about him and you do too. We thank you guys as always for sticking around. You shut your mouth when you're talking. Thank you guys as always. Scampers, we do love you. Hopefully you get some catnip to kick around and have some fun with. Football is almost here. So we thank you guys. We love y'all, and we'll see you next Monday.